Hey folks, Great Northern Prepper here. Today I am going to be explaining to you visually how Bitcoin or Litecoin or other similar cryptocurrencies work. And to do this I'm just going to be using a notebook, a wallet, another notional wallet, some flashcards, some baby blocks, and a couple of coins. Okay, when people talk about a Bitcoin or Litecoin wallet, just imagine that it's a real wallet. Now we will explain in later videos and podcasts and in blog posts, all the ins and outs of how these things actually work in the digital world. But just for a basic understanding, when you're hearing, somebody bought a Bitcoin or sold a Bitcoin or, invested in Bitcoins and they have a digital wallet, this will give you a good general overview of how these things work. So we have two wallets. We have one for Jim and one for Sally. Just pretend this is a real wallet. So, Jim has 3 Bitcoins represented by these quarters here in his Bitcoin wallet. Now, what Jim wants to do is he wants to send one of these Bitcoins over to Sally. But how does he do that? It's not the physical world. You can't just walk up and hand it to her. So how do you take something that's digital and put it in their wallet? Well, what happens is, with every single wallet, you have 2 things in it. You have an address and a private key. And what this address and private key are what are the keys, I guess you could say, no pun intended, keys to using Bitcoin. Much like modern encryption systems, which I won't go into, they use the same thing. You have a public address and a private key that is known only to you. With a public address, it is like, think of it as an email address or a telephone number. It is a way for somebody to get a hold of you, or in this case, send you something. So your public address is if somebody wanted to send you a Bitcoin, all they'd have to know is this public address, which, for simplicity's sake, is ABCDEF. Now, your private key, that is what allows you to sell Bitcoins or send Bitcoins to somebody. So nobody can break into your wallet, even if, say, they were able to get onto your computer, go into your wallet, and they go, I want to send myself your 3 Bitcoins. How can they do that? Well, they can't unless they have the private key. So unless they have this private key, which we'll use for simplicity's sake as your private key, just think of it as a password. 1, 2, 3, 4. The only way that you could send any of these coins here to Sally or to anybody else is with this private key. Anybody can send Bitcoins to you without knowing your private key, but nobody can send the Bitcoins out of your wallet without this private key. So Jim here, he has a private key and an address, and Sally also has a address and a private key. Jim knows Sally's address, Sally knows Jim's address. Jim does not know Sally's private key, and Sally does not know Jim's. What this allows them to do is to be able to send each other Bitcoins, and for them to receive those Bitcoins, because there's a public address. But the only way to access those and, say, sell them or do something with them is through knowing the private key for that specific wallet. Now, you can have multiple wallets and all those types of things, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just say you have one. So, now Jim wants to send Sally 1 Bitcoin. How is he going to do that? Well, he knows what Sally's address is. In this case, let's just say it's ABCDEF. So, in his wallet, he goes into the little Bitcoin program and goes, I want to send 1 Bitcoin to Sally. And he types in her address. Usually it's a very long string of letters and numbers, uppercase and lowercase, etc., etc. But he'll just type in A, B, C, D, E, F. And he clicks send. But it's not as simple as now that that's 1 Bitcoin over there. What happens now is the magic of the system. And this was what makes it decentralized. There is no, guy sitting at Bitcoin Incorporated and saying, I want to, check this over. Like at Visa, if you go to use a Visa payment, the Visa Corporation and their network of people and computers will check to make sure, yes, it's okay for him to spend this amount, or, this looks good and everything like that. But that we don't have that. We don't have a Bitcoin Incorporated. So what happens is this transaction is sent out into the network. This is where miners come in. I don't know if you can see it. It's a little pickaxe. This is where miners come in. Now, anybody can be a miner. With Bitcoin, it's becoming increasingly hard, but it's people out there. People who want to invest the money can become a Bitcoin or a Litecoin miner. And what this is basically a network group of computers running the Bitcoin or Litecoin software, and they basically verify the transactions. So how do they do that? So this Bitcoin is now supposed to be going to Sally at this address right here. A, B, C, D, E, F. Sally over here is waiting for it. The miners, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of them are out there, and they're just looking for transactions to be verified. So what they will do is they will look at this transaction. They will consult what's called the blockchain, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. But the blockchain is basically just a public ledger of all Bitcoin and Litecoin transactions. They look at past transactions. They look at who it was sent to, where it was sent from. They verify that this person does have this Bitcoin in their wallet. They verify that that's the correct address for that Bitcoin, and that that's the correct address to send it to. And there's a bunch of other stuff in there. But basically, they're just making sure everything looks good. And all transactions that have been verified are put into what's called the blockchain. And it's just a big public ledger. It's like a big record book. And they're put into what we call transaction blocks. So these transactions are verified by the miners. The miners look for transactions to verify. And like I said, they check the public ledger. They make sure that that transaction jives up with past transactions and a bunch of other stuff. And then basically what they'll do is they'll take this one transaction and put it into a transaction block, represented by this little, kid's block. And then they'll take another transaction and they'll put that into a transaction block, and another one, and another transaction block, once they're all verified. And then they turn it into a whole transaction block, I should say. So once it's all into a transaction block, it goes into a blockchain. And all these different transactions that make a transaction block are in a long chain. So you just imagine block after block after block after block, and each block consists of many, many transactions. And that is viewable publicly. So you may not know who, Jim is, and you may not know that Susie is address A, B, C, D, E, F, but you'll see that Jim's address sent 1 Bitcoin to A, B, C, D, E, F. That's how the system is able to maintain and figure out, okay, this person has X amount of Bitcoins, this person has X amount of Bitcoins, and when this person sends this Bitcoin to that person, they can verify it by consulting the miners will consult the public ledger. And all these transaction blocks make up the whole public ledger. But what happens if they go along and they're verifying a transaction and they find another transaction? But one of these doesn't look like it's a valid transaction. It's not like the others. That one is spit out, and they wait, and then they verify another transaction, and it goes into that transaction block. So now that the miners here have said that this transaction of Jim sending to Susie's ABCDEF address is verified, this little transaction is now part of the transaction block. The miners have done their job. So now that that's verified, the Bitcoin goes to Susie. So now Susie has her Bitcoin from Jim. For Bitcoin, it takes about 10 minutes on average for the transaction to go through. For the transaction to go into the network, and for the miners to verify it, and for it to go into the blockchain and be completely verified. With Litecoin, it takes about 2.5 minutes. These are all averages. It could take give or take a few minutes or seconds on either end. But that's the basics of how that works. Now, let's say Susie wants to send it back to Jim there. So what she does is she looks up his address, and let's just say it's ABCDF is Jim's address. And she goes, oh, never mind, I didn't want to buy that, dining table from you for a Bitcoin. Sorry about that. Why don't I send you a Bitcoin back? So what she has to do is, when she goes, I want to send it to Jim's address here, ABCDEF, she uses her private key, 1234, to verify that she is actually the person that's supposed to have access to this wallet, and sends it. It then goes to the miners. The miners go, okay, that's a good transaction, and now that transaction is verified, and it goes into the blockchain, which is basically just like a public ledger. It's just a big record book, but it's a digital one, and they just call it the blockchain. But just think of it as a public record book, a public ledger of all transactions done in either Bitcoin or Litecoin. So now that the miners have verified that and it's in the blockchain, the miner says, good, it's done, and that Bitcoin goes to Jim's address, and now he has 3 Bitcoins again in his wallet. It's pretty simple. This was meant to be just a general overview, and I hope that that helped you out with understanding a little bit better. It kind of gets lost sometimes in the way that it's described by people who are more familiar and more tech savvy, but this is a good general overview of how that works. These miners, they're not really miners, they're not really creating anything or digging anything up, but they're searching around the network. So they're just looking all around, and they're searching around the network, and once they see a transaction, that's when they suck it up, they check it, they verify it, or if it's bad, they kick it out. And once they verify it, then it goes into that public ledger. And the thing is, though, is that as these transactions are being put into a transaction block, the other miners who are finding transactions and putting them into a block are also checking the old transactions. So there's multiple checks on those. So it's not just one person that can lie about stuff, and the miners can't go out there and pick and choose. But that's just a good general overview. I also hope that you could kind of see the 2 parts to the Bitcoin wallet are very, very important. Your address, which is public, which is fine to give out to anybody. Nobody can hack your system by knowing your address to your wallet at all. This is meant to be public. You can post it up anywhere. You can put it on a business card to hand out to people. You can put it on your Facebook page. It doesn't matter. That part is meant to be public because that allows people to send stuff to you. It does not allow anybody to take Bitcoins out of your wallet. Now, the reason you want to keep your private key safe is obviously that is the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. as long as you and only you know your private key, nobody can steal your Bitcoins. This is a good reason why you should be very careful and have antivirus, spyware, and anti-malware, good programs on there to keep that kind of stuff off there so that a system cannot see you logging using your password. But as long as this is kept private, nobody can touch anything in your Bitcoin system. The way that these, a lot of times people get into wallets and steal Bitcoins is usually because they have viruses on their computer and they can see what you're typing in. Now some people would say that that's why I don't like Bitcoins, but that's no different than using online banking. That's no different than going and typing your social for a credit card application online. If you don't have good antivirus software and take good proper precautions, it doesn't really matter what you're doing in the modern world. You're going to be in for some trouble. So that's no more of a weakness than any kind of modern banking practices. So as long as you keep that private key, and that's why it's extremely important to keep that private key. But another reason to keep it safe, but very secure, and making sure you don't lose it, is because this is the only way to access this wallet. So you can basically think of it like this. If you accidentally forget your private key, you cannot access this wallet. This thing there's no coins. You can't go online and call up Bitcoin Incorporated and say, hey, I lost my password, can I get a new one? Once you lose this private key, you could never get these 3 Bitcoins or more. There was a gentleman in England who actually had bought Bitcoins long time ago when they were, in the cents per Bitcoin. At current values, they valued it at over $7 million. And he'd kept his digital wallet, was a file on a computer, and he ended up throwing it away. So he can't go online and say, I need to get access to my wallet. He didn't have the private key. Without that private key, you cannot access your wallet. But anyways, I hope that was a good general overview. Please comment below in the video. Please go to our website at greatnorthernprepper.com. Click on our Amazon banner and bookmark it. Once you bookmark that, once you click on the Amazon banner, it'll take you to Amazon. Once you bookmark it, every time you go to Amazon, just go through that bookmark and buy whatever you normally would buy. If your book was going to be $15, it'll be still $15. But what it does is Amazon will kick a little bit of money our way and helps put air in the sails, so to speak. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. Obviously, like us on Facebook, and please subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. And this has been the Great Northern Prepper, and I'm out.
I wore out my shoes in that wrong way to run. I blistered my skin working hard in the sun. Supper's almost over and I done cleaned my plate, and there's a light shining yonder, boys, I don't think I'll wait. I'm a laid back one and I've been one so long. I ain't perfect, you can tell by my songs. Brothers, forgive me for all of my wrongs. The good Lord, He's calling and it's time to go home. I hear Him calling and it's time to go home.